Spring break of 2017 was supposed to be unforgettable. My friends and I had been planning it for months. 5 of us packed into an old SUV, ready to drive down to Florida for a week of beaches, parties, and absolute freedom. The first day went exactly as planned. Road trip snacks, blasting music, stopping at random roadside diners along the way. But somewhere in Georgia, late at night, everything changed. We had been driving for hours, exhaustion settling in heavy. The highway stretched endlessly through miles of nothingness, just dark roads and scattered trees. We hadn't passed another car in a while, and the GPS warned we were still an hour away from the nearest town. That's when we saw the flickering neon sign, vacancy, hanging above a rundown motel on the side of Route 12. It wasn't ideal, but we were too tired to care. The place looked abandoned at first. The front desk was dimly lit, and the lobby smelled like old carpet and stale air. A tired-looking man finally emerged from the back room, barely acknowledging us as he handed over the keys to 2 rooms. His only words were to stay inside after midnight. We laughed it off, assuming it was some local superstition or just a weird way to tell us not to cause trouble. The rooms were exactly what you'd expect from a roadside motel. Faded floral bedspreads, buzzing fluorescent lights, and furniture that looked decades old. My friend Jake and I took one room, while the others stayed next door. The exhaustion from the drive hit hard, and within minutes of lying down, I felt myself drifting into sleep. That's when I heard it. Soft tapping. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound was rhythmic, deliberate. It was coming from the window. My stomach tightened. We were on the 2nd floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing someone could stand on. I forced myself to turn my head, and through the sheer curtain, I saw a shadow. Tall, motionless, just standing there, on the other side of the glass. My breath caught in my throat. The taps started again. 3 slow knocks. I wanted to wake Jake, but fear paralyzed me. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The shadow was gone. I barely slept after that, every sound outside making my skin crawl. In the morning, I convinced myself it had just been exhaustion messing with my head. But when we went down for breakfast, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The motel's front desk had old, faded photos pinned to a corkboard, Polaroids of guests. Some looked happy, some were blurry, but one thing stood out. A handful of the photos were crossed out with black marker. And then I saw one that made my stomach drop. A picture of a young man standing in front of our room. His face was blurred, but what made my skin prickle was the date written underneath. March 14th, 2016. Exactly 1 year ago. Something felt wrong. I called the others over, my voice shaking as I pointed at the picture. No one had an explanation. We decided it was time to leave. As we packed up, I heard Jake curse under his breath. He was standing by the window, looking pale. I followed his gaze, and my stomach twisted. On the outside of the glass, there were 3 distinct handprints. Not just fingerprints, full handprints, pressed against the glass from the outside. But we were on the 2nd floor. We rushed out of the room, threw our bags in the car, and sped off, leaving the motel in the dust. No one spoke for a while, the tension thick and unspoken. Hours later, when we finally stopped for gas, my friend Sarah broke the silence. She had been searching online, trying to find anything about that motel. That's when we learned the truth. That place had been shut down 2 years ago. It had been the site of a string of disappearances, all young travelers passing through. The owners abandoned it after the last guest vanished. But we had stayed there. We had spoken to someone. The worst part? When we checked our phones, trying to find any evidence, any record of a charge, a location pin, anything. There was nothing. No transaction, no call history, no GPS logs. Like we had never been there at all. Spring break of 2019 was supposed to be perfect. My best friend Emily's family owned a beach house in a small coastal town in South Carolina, and they had offered to let us stay there for the week. It was a beautiful, secluded house, right on the water with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the beach. No hotels, no crowds, just the ocean, the sand, and the kind of freedom only a week with no responsibilities can bring. It sounded like paradise. But that first night, something felt off. The house was massive, but eerily quiet, and the wind howled against the windows as if trying to get inside. We all shrugged it off and spent the night drinking on the back deck, letting the sound of crashing waves drown out our unease. At around 2 a.m., I decided to call it a night. Emily and the others stayed outside, still laughing and swapping stories, but I was exhausted. The guest room they gave me was beautiful, big windows with a perfect view of the ocean. But as I got into bed, something strange happened. The moment I turned off the lights, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from inside the house. I held my breath, listening. The others were still outside. I could hear them. So, who was inside? The footsteps didn't stop. They moved down the hall, pausing outside my door. My heart pounded. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, but before I could do anything, the footsteps continued, moving away from my room toward the staircase that led to the lower level. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I told Emily what I'd heard. She seemed uneasy but tried to laugh it off, saying the house was old and made weird noises. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But something about the way she avoided eye contact told me she wasn't convinced either. That night, the unease only grew stronger. Around midnight, we all gathered in the living room to play cards. Emily's boyfriend, Mark, got up to grab more drinks from the kitchen, but when he came back, he looked shaken. We asked him what was wrong, and he hesitated before finally speaking. He said he had seen someone standing at the bottom of the staircase. A woman. He had only caught a glimpse before she disappeared into the darkness, but he swore she had been there. The room went silent. None of us knew what to say. We decided to check the house just in case someone had somehow gotten inside, but every door was still locked, every window secure. There was no one else there. At least, no one we could see. The third night was the worst. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly, heart pounding for no reason. The room was quiet, the ocean outside calm, but something felt wrong. I sat up in bed, glancing around the dark room. That's when I saw it. A shadow in the reflection of the window. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a weird angle from the moon. But as my eyes adjusted, my stomach dropped. The shadow wasn't outside. It was inside the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Slowly, my eyes drifted toward the foot of my bed. And there she was. A woman. Drenched, her skin pale and bloated like something that had been pulled from the water. Her long, wet hair clung to her face, and her mouth was slightly open, as if she was trying to whisper something. But the worst part was her eyes. They were hollow, black pits, sinking into her face like something had taken them. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything. But before I could react, she lunged. The next thing I remember, I was waking up to Emily, shaking me, her face pale with fear. I was on the floor, tangled in my blankets, drenched in sweat. She kept asking what had happened, but I couldn't find the words. The only thing I could do was point at the window. That's when she froze. Her hands clenched into fists, her breathing sharp. I followed her gaze, turning slowly toward the glass. There, on the outside of the window, were wet handprints. We left the next morning, packed up everything, and got out of that house without looking back. Emily never spoke about it again, and I never asked. But weeks later, curiosity got the best of me. I searched online, trying to find anything about the property, the area, and I did. Years ago, a woman had drowned not far from that house. Some said she had been swept away by the tide. Others whispered that she had been pulled under by something no one could explain. Her body was never recovered. Locals believe she still wanders the shore at night, searching for someone or something to take with her, and sometimes she finds them. Spring break of 2022 was supposed to be a last-minute escape. Nothing fancy. My friend Ryan found a cheap hotel near the boardwalk in Galveston, Texas. It wasn't the kind of place you'd see in travel brochures. Old, slightly run down, with faded paint and flickering neon signs. But the price was unbeatable, and after a long semester, we just wanted a place to sleep after days at the beach and nights out drinking. When we checked in, the woman at the front desk handed us 2 key cards, her expression oddly strained. She gave us a map of the hotel layout and circled our room number, 314. But as she slid the paper across the counter, she hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before lowering her voice. "If you hear anything strange at night, just ignore it." Then, as if realizing she'd said too much, she quickly forced a smile and waved us off. At first, we joked about it. Maybe the place was haunted, maybe the walls were thin, maybe she just liked to mess with guests. But the weirdness started before we even got to our room. The hallway to the 3rd floor smelled off. Not like mildew or old carpet, but something worse. Damp, stale air with an underlying scent of decay. It reminded me of standing water, the kind you find in abandoned buildings. I tried to ignore it as we walked, but then Ryan stopped suddenly, staring ahead. Down the hall, between rooms 312 and 316, there was another door. It had no number. The other doors had scuffed brass plates with peeling numbers attached. But this one was bare, just a plain wooden door with a tarnished knob. Something about it made my skin crawl. It didn't match the rest of the hallway. It was older, almost wrong, like it belonged to another building entirely. I told myself it was probably just a storage closet. Still, I felt relief when we reached our room and shut the door behind us. The first night was mostly normal. We stayed out late, came back exhausted, and crashed immediately. But around 3 a.m., something woke me up. At first, I thought it was just the wind against the window, but then I heard it again. A noise from the hallway. Soft knocking. Not at our door, but somewhere nearby. Slow, rhythmic, like someone tapping gently against wood. I sat up, listening. Ryan was still passed out, breathing heavily. I considered waking him, but then the knocking stopped. The silence felt heavier than before, like something was pressing against the air. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. The next morning, I asked the front desk if there was another guest in the room next to ours. The clerk frowned, glancing at the computer. "You're in 314, he muttered, scrolling through the system. 312 and 316 are unoccupied. My stomach dropped. That night I stayed awake, watching the clock tick past 3 a.m., waiting. The air in the room felt thick, like the humidity had doubled. Then it started again. The knocking. But this time it was louder. I clenched the sheets, heart hammering as I listened. It wasn't just knocking anymore. It was scraping. A slow, dragging sound, like fingernails running down a wooden surface. It came from the hallway, moving closer. Then, our door handle rattled. I shot up in bed, shaking Ryan awake. He groggily muttered something, but before I could respond, the noise stopped. The room fell silent. My breath came fast, sharp, my ears straining for any sign of movement outside. Nothing. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept toward the peephole, pressing my eye against it. My stomach twisted. The hallway was empty. But that door with no number, it was different now. It was open. Just slightly, barely enough to see inside. A thin sliver of absolute darkness beyond. The air in our room turned ice cold. I stumbled back, shaking Ryan harder, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to leave." He saw the look on my face and didn't argue. We grabbed our things and bolted. As we rushed past the hallway, I made the mistake of glancing into the open door. There was nothing in that room. No furniture, no walls, just blackness. Spring break is supposed to be about fun, freedom, and making memories. But sometimes the memories you bring back aren't the ones you wanted. A strange motel that shouldn't exist. Something waiting in the dark corners of a beach house or a hotel room with a door that leads to nowhere. These aren't just stories. They're warnings. If these terrifying true spring break stories gave you chills, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more unsettling real horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because sometimes the scariest things happen when you least expect them.